Okay. So yeah, welcome to this conversation. I'm helping to organize these sessions with Alex and David on behalf of kind of a learning journey that we're going on with the kind of the detailed like questions about how we work on assemblies. And lots of you know on this call already that the Humanity Project that myself and Lee have been involved in for quite some time now is really trying to work out how to popularize people carving out their own space for democratic participation. So really self-organized democratic assembly work, which works in quite a different way to the kind of institutionalized citizens' assemblies that you might see put on by a government or something like that. And because we know lots of people who are experts in that space who've done great work on trying to design the process, create the selection process so that it can be representative, make sure that the learning processes and the critical literacy kind of educational stuff, and then all of the deliberation that people go through is well developed and designed and then well held. But we also know that when you do that on the ground with not much money and not a PhD and not £500,000 and not much cash and not much space, you end up having to learn how to make the best version that you can out of like what you've basically got. And Lee said something to me recently, which I thought was really on point, which was like that we need to really work out how we can learn the best things that we can from the expert space and at the same time create a democracy that's basically affordable and then possible for people to do and for people to enact and empower themselves. So a lot of the other questions that we've asked in this series have been more focused on kind of something very specific about facilitation processes or, you know, who sets the agenda and who sets the question and who draws the boundaries that makes things either in or out of the frame. And obviously there's lots of power issues involved in the setup of all these spaces. But one of the questions that's come up again and again in the Humanity Project, particularly talking with Lee kind of critically about anti-racism and how we might try and make our project a kind of an anti-racist project that is actually fit for the sort of current moment in the 21st century is really like, what can we think about and how can we learn together so that we can make spaces where there really is a lot of learning going on about equitable participation. And the thing that struck me personally for the conversations we've had over the last year or so, Lee, is like, as a woman, I know that if you have 50% men, 50% women in a room, and someone says that's going to be fair, I know that it probably won't be in terms of the dialogic space, in terms of like how much room gets taken up, how much people pay attention to women over other people. I know that it often doesn't work out like that. And I've become a very gobby woman over the last 6 years. But a lot of people who come into a participatory political process are not kind of activists who've spent a long time screaming on the streets and, you know, growing their confidence to go and make a big noise and stand up. And so there's lots of issues with like encouraging participation in spaces. And so we wanted to hold this conversation to really try and dig deeper into this question around race, but also probably that helps us to go further into like other people who may be typically more marginalized for whatever reason when they come into a space of participation. So I'll hand on to Lee, I think now, unless I'm getting the order wrong, David.
Unfortunately, you're getting the order wrong. Hold your fire, Lee, just for a moment. So hi, everybody, I'm David. I'm going to be topping and tailing our conversation with Nick taking over in the middle. So thanks very much. My personal thanks for all of you joining us. A couple of things to say by way of setup. So one is, of course, many of you here will be experienced in running events. Many of you here will have experience of being in events which are run for you and with you. And so obviously we're going to try to have our values of a good assembly, of citizen participation, of honesty and decency, integrity, constancy, and so forth. But of course, people like me can make mistakes. So I hope you will point them out to me in a gentle and considerate way, and I will make any adjustments that are needed. It's the first thing. Our facilitation, as I've said, is going to be two-handed today. So I'll do this beginning and the end, and Nick will take the middle, which is about stories and themes, and I'll explain what that is in a second. We really only have one kind of ground rule, and that ground rule is about respect. So we hope you can all respect each other in how you treat each other. People will have different views. Please respect those. Also respect each other's time. We have said that we'll finish by 8:30. It'll be a lot easier to finish at 8:30 if people are quick with their stories, and if when we, Nick or I as facilitators, come in and say thank you for your contribution, or can you just finish now, please? If people do actually finish, that will make us more able to finish on time. And therefore respect everyone else's time. In terms of our agenda, in a moment, we will split you off into groups of 3. So you have a chance to at least meet in more depth some of the people in the room. There's not really enough time for us to go around and hear from everybody directly. Then Lee will have his chance to explain the question and what's drawn into this. We'll have 5 minutes of Lee explaining his perspective. And then we'll hand over to you and to Nick to facilitate on the stories of your experiences in some kind of participative process, some forum, some closed door session, and your experiences there, which can help to teach us about how participation, citizen assemblies and similar can be more anti-racist. After we've had given everyone hopefully a chance to tell their stories, first Claire and then Lee, and then the rest of you will have a chance to bring together the themes. What is it you've heard? What are the insights we can take forward into the rest of our work? And then finally we'll close and we will aim for 12:30. That's time zone when I'm in there. We're going to finish at 8:30. We can possibly help it. So I hope that makes sense to all of you. And I think at this moment, I ask Alex to send everyone into our groups of 3 so you can get to know a few other people in the room. So Alex.
Hold on, if I may.
Sorry.
Yeah, so just a quick one, because I know some people might just need a bit of a refresher on the Humanity Project itself, because I invited people like, particularly like Deborah and others, without necessarily giving them a briefing. So I'm just going to give a quick overview of that. So the Humanity Project is an attempt to create a new 21st century politics. Its focus is around 3 distinct constituencies, really: XR Rebellion, the environmental constituencies, Black communities represented through myself in relation to anti-racism, and the Cost of Living Alliance, which is around tackling the impacts of the economic crisis facing poor communities. And each of us coming together over a period of time, coming to the conclusion that actually we're all struggling in our individual silos, and maybe it makes sense that we have a conversation. We had a conversation and we haven't stopped talking ever since. That's about 2 years ago. And we have consolidated ourselves into this Humanity Project with the view of putting humans back at the center of a 21st century politic. And what we're doing here is thinking about, if we want to make a movement more broadly in which people from the bottom up can make decisions, what kind of forms of democracy are going to lend themselves to that? And of course, we've looked at citizens' assemblies, sortition assemblies. These are the sort of big government sponsored types of events usually, which are hellishly expensive, and the province of academics largely. What we're looking at is developing a new form of assembly, which is a popular assembly, which is affordable, cheap, and we can take to the community, our communities, to get involved and become part of a broader democratic culture. The aim of the project is to develop a movement that means the day after the general election in 2008, we've established a counter-democratic culture that is grassroots, that is authentic, and that is representative. And part of these discussions that we're having with disabled groups, with Black groups, with other groups, is to explore from your own experience just what your experience of democracy is. I know for Black communities, very few of us will have been to citizens' assemblies. I'm only guessing. but I think that's probably a very rare event for our community. So we won't have a lot of experience of that, and I'll speak about that later on. But from whatever type of democracy or lack thereof that you've experienced, that's what we're talking about throughout the course of this conversation, in the hope that at the end, your commentary will be able to inform the design process for a new form of popular democracy, that rather than consulting Black communities in that consultative, abusive type of format, that will actually say to communities, we're going to organise you to take a democratic vote on what your priorities are in relation to policing or education or whatever, rather than the kind of soft consultation which we attend with diminishing numbers, and for which our voices are very rarely heard. So it's an attempt to look at how you create a new national movement from the bottom up through using these alternative forms of democracy. Sorry to take that so long, but I could see concern on people's faces who think, he's asked me to come along here, having bamboozled me, and now thrown me in the deep end. And I just wanted people to understand the general context who didn't have that understanding. So I hope that's helpful.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Lee. And with that, I know Alex and I have been messaging. Because of the numbers, it makes sense for us to have groups of 4. You'll have 1 minute each to say sort of the blind date question. What's your name and where do you come from? Like, what's drawn you here this evening? So if Alex presses go, and we'll see you back here. We're going to give you a grace extra minute. So it'll be 5 minutes for the 4 of you to introduce yourselves to each other. And we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. I think that is everyone back. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm sure you found, like us, it was too little time.
Much too short. We were discussing what's the point of democracy in 2 minutes. Cut short.
Okay, we can come back to that. Hold that thought wherever you've got to, because now is our chance to turn over to Lee, who has 5 minutes to unpack this question about how can these kinds of participative approaches be more anti-racist. And then after Lee, we'll hand Lee, if you can hand to Nick, and Nick will then encourage people to tell their stories of their own experience. So over to you, Lee, for 5 minutes on the question.
Well, look, after lots of deliberations about what a grassroots democracy would look like, it struck us that looking across the world in areas of Europe, France and other parts, that citizen assemblies were emerging as a key construct for co-production or consultation with all sorts of communities right across the world. In fact, there has been some global citizens assemblies, which was dominated by people from the global south. That Claire and others can tell us. I wasn't there, but Claire and others can speak more about, I think, than I can. And in considering what these different forms of democracy will look like, my challenge to the citizens assemblies movement, it was irrevocably white. And even where they built in sortition, which means, they select 100 people and they randomly select them, and you might get a proportionality of Black voices from communities in that room, they're going to be so small in number that they're not going to really feel empowered in terms of that conversation. So how do we then construct an assembly that is, one, affordable? If you talk about a sortition of assembly, you're talking about something in excess of £100,000. It's the best democracy money can buy, and that's an anathema. I
was going to say that.
So we say, our view is, if we're building democracy from the ground up and expect people to say to people, actually, you already have the power. You are the power as individuals. And by coming together, you can express that power. And by voting on the democratic principle, you can put leverage and pressure on authorities and for systems change and change locally. And so what today's about is to try and unpack that question. Is that, okay, we're not going to be spending £100,000 on these assemblies. We want to make sure that democracy is affordable and accessible by focusing on Black communities. And Rita and Operation Black Vote are doing 4 assemblies in African, Caribbean and Asian communities to test out these various models of doing things within a new popular assembly framework that we think is much more effective in terms of the goals and the momentum movement building that we're into. And so today really is a conversation about what that should look like. And we've thought about things like weighted assemblies. So if there is a national assembly, you know, does lived experience of communities play a role in informing deliberations? You know what assemblies are like. You'll have a question or an issue. We'll bring experts to bear so that communities are educated about the issue that they're got a priority, a focus on, and through that education, so that they're informed, they make quality decisions. The basis of the Humanity Project is anywhere time you get good people of goodwill who have got the right information, they always make better decisions than politicians. That's just a simple fact. And so it's a leap of faith to say, it's not a leap of faith for us to say that, you know, by giving people the right information, by making sure they've got that, you know, unalloyed expertise, they then can go into deliberation mode and having, you know, they may come back and say, can we ask more questions and get clarifications? And by the end, they're going to be very much more closer to a quality decision. And it's certainly something that they then can decide how they want to go about advocating, leveraging, putting the pressure on for change, whether that's a police service or an education service or a housing service, or whether it's broader issues. Our job from the Humanity Project is really to help people see the bigger picture. And so we're working with communities in places like Manchester that are just focusing on litter picking. But what we're doing is we're showing them, we hope to show them that what happens to the litter that you pick, who's responsible for making decisions about where that litter goes, and would you like to meet them so that you're engaged with them? And these are young people, these are kids who are picking the litter, cleaning up their area. And so we facilitate their understanding into the broader picture of environmental issues. And what we do in terms of our own thinking around anti-racist practice is link them with communities in Black and Asian communities who are doing similar work or have similar concerns. And so what we found is, you know, there was a big campaign in Hull around school exclusions. Well, everybody knows that's a big issue for the Black community. Why aren't the people in Hull talking to the people in London around school exclusions? Because what we think is, rather than slamming people with the message that, you know, you've got to be anti-racist and this is what it means, we say that if you bring people together for a discussion, proximity breaks down prejudice. If you're talking to those who you've got views about, negative views about, and they're sitting in front of you as an asylum seeker, and they're telling you their human story, that's the most powerful form of anti-racism or promotion of empathy and understanding that you can have. And one of the key things and the challenges for us is that, of course, there's an economic crisis globally. Of course, there is a crisis in democracy. That's why the extreme right are rising in the way that they are, because of the lies told by neoliberal politicians. Of course, there's an environmental crisis. Of course, there's a crisis in relation to the promotion of racism as a means of scapegoating and diverting communities' attention. But there is also a fundamental empathy deficit worldwide, which means the inability of people to see life and see things through the eyes of other people. And that empathy deficit, we think, is a fundamental focus of what our anti-racist practice should be. And the main tactic of dealing with that is by making impossible conversations happen between groups who wouldn't normally meet, but which we facilitate in the hope that, you know, the race riot towns who've got issues with asylum seekers are brought together with asylum seekers for a human conversation about experiences. We think that's the most effective way of bringing about the kind of understanding we're looking at. And that's what you're invited to help us to do. So in essence, you know, we're on the democratic Starship Enterprise. We are boldly going where, you know, nobody has ever been before, and we're unashamed about it. We are rejecting some of the shibboleths of the 20th century, like, you know, the certainty in politics, vote for me and I'll, you know, your teeth will go whiter, you're richer, your kids will be happier, you know, blah, blah, blah. All that bullshit is put, we reject. And part of that rejection of certainty is to say, actually, we understand that humanity is on the verge of extinction. We're all petrified of that. We're not quite sure what we need to do, but we do know if we have the right information and we bring people together, quality solutions will emerge. And so it's a leap of faith in humanity. It's an attempt to make humanity fall back in love with itself. We're in the game of seducing humanity back in love with itself so that it can extend the kind of empathy and understanding that hopefully will save the world for the next generation. So it's a big project task, but it's very pragmatic. It's not abstract. So we're starting with these big ideas and we're saying, well, how do you begin? And we begin with conversations with people in their local communities, whether that's litter picking, getting a zebra crossing outside their school, whether it's about dealing with asylum seekers, whether it's about whatever the issue is. We start there. We help them to understand and bring expertise to that issue. We link them with other people in the country who are doing similar, and we hope to gather all these assemblies up into a national assembly that gives us a movement and takes us where we are between now and 2028. Our fear is a sort of Farage moment where, you know, with the backing of Trump, Farage ends up, you know, being a serious player by 2028, if not re-entered the Tory party and leader of that and looking at being prime minister. So that's where we are. Slightly more than 5 minutes, I know, but I'll end there.
Excellent.
I'm going to hand over to Nick.
Thanks a lot, Lee. Thank you. And Lee, you said empathy deficits, humanity is on the verge of extinction. And that's exactly right. I think humanity is facing an identity crisis. Who belongs to this group called humanity and who doesn't belong? All the time we're seeing this play out. Anyway, so now we want to kind of hand over to you to, you know, open it up a bit. Would love to hear a story of an experience you have had grappling with the question of the session and any insights or lessons that you believe, you know, can inform the session and of course others. So it's open. Please put your hand up, or shall I pick someone? Deborah, I'm looking at you.
I felt it literally. Good evening, everyone. I'm a founder, just quick introduction, founder and consultant at Black British Parent. And clearly I agree with a lot of what's been said previously, especially what Lee was talking about in terms of having lived experience community members involved. I personally have been a part of a similar project where a charitable organization, which I mentioned in a breakout room, who was working with lived experience, people with lived experience of being pregnant or a new mum within prisons, and it was having those women being at round tables at Parliament, at Westminster, etc. So a lot of policies was able to be adjusted as a result of that. So I definitely agree with that as being a valuable and a useful process. However, the Black community isn't necessarily so trusting of government anything. So I would expect that would be a bit tricky in some instances, depending on, you know, the demographic and the area and the group of people. I think the disgruntled ones definitely need to be there. But obviously history has shown them or proven to them, you know, the lack of trust or etc. So that's just where I'm at the moment. But I definitely think it's something with education, you know, workshops and that kind of stuff. I definitely think it could work.
Excellent. Thanks, Deborah. Anyone else?
Yeah, can I contribute something?
Yes, Floyd.
And apologies for my moving screen. I decided to sit away from my computer and sort of slum it on the, you know, so I'm trying to get the balance and, you know, But yeah, so thanks for for the invite. I'm Floyd, and I think part of my thinking, and it's quite simplistic, is that people act out of two primary things, isn't it? Fear of loss and hope of gain. And I think in the wide humanity projects and the journey that we're on, if we could in some way try to identify what those fear of loss is, and what the hope, i.e. the gain that people think they can achieve. And it sounds really simplistic, but they are our primary driving force, aren't they? And the other thing I think is useful, I think will be useful, and I'm thinking aloud now, is around having, when I say figureheads, I mean that very loosely. People want to see who is and where they're going, and how we present this, and that could be multiple figureheads, but there needs to be somewhere, some visual thing that people identify and see. And the second part of that visualization of personification of what it is and who it is, I know this has been discussed later on, is how we get column inches, get the odd comment in the so-called mainstream media, because those are the drip, the small drip effects that sort of helps to coalesce the individual citizens' joys that we have in the conversations. So I think hope of gain, fear of loss, some kind of personification about individuals' faces that people can see, and having that drip constant effect where we can in the media. And I think that links to the whole notion of allyship. And those allies may be very intuitive, but also they may be counterintuitive. And sometimes the most counterintuitive allies can help the program and the project and the initiative gain a certain level of pace.
Excellent. Thanks, Floyd. Anyone else? Pete? Rita? Rita, were you speaking? I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Oh no, you're back on mute.
No, Rita, you've gone back on mute. I think you can. I hope you can't only have a camera or a microphone.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, lovely. Sorry about that. I was waiting to see if other people wanted to speak first, because I think in some ways I've been working with these kind of issues for a while, but I think one of the things that I see, having always worked on trying to the issues of building unity between African, Caribbean and Asian communities, whether it was through the National Black Caucus or 1990 Trust or OBV or the Women's Organization in Leicester that I managed, was that I think there are people within our communities who are think that the present system is okay because they're gaining traction within that system. And we can't kid ourselves that everybody believes what we believe, which is that the system isn't listening to ordinary people and that it's broken. So those people have a vested interest in pursuing success, in inverted commas, within the present system. And some of them are beginning to make traction. And dare I say that part of it is with some of the work that organizations like OBV have done in showing people, pathways into that system. But, being Black, the color of your skin, we know is no longer enough, because just because they're Black doesn't mean that they either understand the issues or that they speak up when they need to for Black communities and the needs of Black communities. And therefore, I think when we look at talking to people about assemblies, I think we need to present it as this is another alternative. If you feel disenfranchised, if you feel nobody listens to you, if you feel you're voiceless, have a go at this. Let's look at this as something that might give you another option. And I think I would hazard a guess that white working class communities feel similarly. When I've spoken to white people who are really impoverished, you know, they've said that I've heard similar sentiments from them as I've heard in Black communities, Asian communities. But in every community, there are people who benefit and profit from the existing system, who will try and pull down anything that you try and promote. And I think part of the political structures, the present major political parties, will be also some of the challenges that we face, because they're also recruiting all the time and trying to convince people. And I like the fact that we're prepared to now acknowledge and shout out loud that there are no easy answers, there are no certainties. In fact, the world is made up of uncertainties, and the world is made up of decisions that are about change. And people don't normally like change, so they will want to revert back and stay with the system that they think they know, even if it's not a good system for them. And so it's a big ask to ask people to move away from that perceived certainty, because there is no certainty in the world, as Lee said. So I think we have to be much more creative in the way in we approach it. And I do think young people, we all remember when we were young, and I think we remember how we used to feel about how invincible we were and how we could change the world and how everything there was for our taking. I think that's where our future lies and our answers lie, in activating and inspiring and working with young people, but using the experiences of older people and getting that intergenerational stuff going. That's how we harness the strength we need in order to shift forward as communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rita. Yeah, a couple of things that I think you brought up, Floyd brought up, and of course, Brother Lee spoke about earlier on. You know, it's this representation at the top and so on, and that reminds me of a speech by Ruha Benjamin. I don't know if anyone knows that, where she says, "Black faces in high places are not going to save us," and that is exactly what we have right now, right? You know, with the Conservative Party, they're so good at it, so very good at it. Anyway, I want to try and can we try and sort of, you know, just for this space, how can we make spaces such as this, you know, that's humanity projects are trying to develop, how can we make these spaces more I don't know, I don't even want to use the word inclusive. How can we make them, you know, more open for us, as it were? You know, what's his name? Lewis Gordon talks about, you know, being in white spaces and Black people sort of, there's this sort of dichotomy, you know, we feel sort of highly visible but also invisible at the same time within these spaces. How can we be, you know, how can what we think or what we bring to these spaces be, you know, taken on board a bit more? Mara, you got your hand up.
Yes, I wasn't sure that I was going to start on exactly what you just finished on.
Oh, don't. You don't have to.
In response to, and kind of following on from the earlier comments, my background, I am here because I got passed on the invitation from Pete. I work at Shared Future, but I also have a background in tech startups and entrepreneurship, operations in a number of different fields, facilitation, and studies in Indigenous ancestral religions and how that works out for people practicing in the UK in the modern world today. And I'm doing a research master's at the University of East London. I'm particularly interested in how the stories we tell, some of them activate us and encourage and empower us, and some of them we seem to miss the point. And so people will talk about Derry Girls and know a lot more about Northern Ireland, and people will watch Dune or Hunger Games and not get to the point. So that's a number of reasons why I'm interested in the room. But one thing that I wanted to say was that in the past, when I've run events and we've taken on a slightly indigenously informed approach where we have handed the power to participants early in the game. Do you have any questions? Is there anything you need? People haven't really known how to take that power. It takes a lot of encouragement and support to get people to. And I think that that is something that is affecting the way people engage with democracy in a number of different ways, which is that even if you were like, you can go out right now and change like 3 things that are really affecting you, or even one thing for one day, people will be like, oh no, well, what do you want to do? Like, it's all right. And so that's something I'm thinking about. And then obviously, because of my research, I think kind of linked to that, I think we have to, or not we have to, I think that I'm particularly interested in how we approach giving people a taste of what it can feel like. Because I don't know anyone who can, I don't know many people, in fact, I would probably count on one hand, maybe the number of people who aren't working in something to do with democracy, who can say that they engage in democratic, actual democracy in their workplace or in their homes or in their creative spaces, or when they get on the bus or when they're thinking about transport. Like, we live in a very non-democratic world. And so I think that I'm particularly interested in how we can do this via TV, for example. But in general, I'm very curious about what spaces are currently democratic, how we give people a taste of that power, how we give people a taste of that democracy. So then they know, oh, actually, I have been listened to and talked to and seen change. Now I understand that my government can do the same. That's my point.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mara. And you've hit the nail on the head there. People always ask, well, in fact, a provocation for this is, what is democracy? What are we talking about when we talk about democracy? And it's very simple for me. Democracy is participation and power, period. That's it. So what do people do with this? Floyd and Gospel, I see you've got your hands up. Floyd, if you don't mind, I'll pass to Gospel first. Gospel, good evening, greetings. You're on mute.
Hi everyone, good evening. Actually thought Floyd was gonna go first. Hello everyone, good evening. I'm Gospel Obele from the Black Equity Organization. I head fundraising and programs at BEL, and in the broader scheme of my career, I'm also an economist, and I've done lots of work around social inclusion, governance, policy, impact investing, fundraising, and all the likes. In context to the work we do at BEL and from my own broader lens as well, I mean, just think of the concept of social polarization in terms of how the associated social risk are sort of, impacting on democracy, decision making, especially from, people of color as well. And one of the broad things I can think about is the need to sort of begin to strengthen capabilities within Black Asian communities to sort of ensure more people know how to hold government to account, and also how to, make the most of what democracy has to offer. So sort of a case where more people are aware about, the whole citizen agenda setting, how to hold government accountable, how to use data or evidence to sort of drive accountability, or, determine or define what policies are really required, from every administration of some sort. And also the concept of information, disinformation, and misinformation as well. Empowering people of color to also, at least know how to differentiate that, and knowing how to also ensure that, like I mentioned earlier on, holding government more to accountable in context to information made available, and separating the real information from the noise, and ensuring that agendas are being represented where it matters the most. And we're also being able to creatively work around getting government buy-in, getting institutional buy-in, for policy and for the required change that needs to happen in the democratic era where we find ourselves in. So very broadly, I'll think about systemic change in context to empowering communities of color to be able to play more intelligently, more strategically, more systematically in terms of demanding for change and, you know, yeah, making the best of what democracy has to offer in context of the right information as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Gospel. The question then is, and I hope Floyd speaks to this a bit, the question then becomes, how do we come together in these spaces and make the most of these spaces? Floyd.
Yes, no pressure there then. I was going to say something not very interesting, but now you really pushed me to excel. But what I was going to say is that I think the raison d'etre of the project speaks to that element of how we not only bring people together, but enable or try to facilitate people feeling comfortable. And Lee alluded to this earlier. The fact that we have issues of racial justice, issues of environment, all these key areas where we're coalescing together, because people don't always attend or participate because of a singular issue. And I think the more we promote this multifaceted approach, you know, these are the 2-3 issues that we are concerned with, I think people will attend or participate with the knowledge that there's a wider spectrum of issues that they are equally engaged with. And I also think the other part around the notion of democracy is the realism that we can't, you know, even if we all voted, you know, and signed a petition for Parliament, you know, 2 million people signed it, that has no bearing on what is going to happen. So these, you know, being realistic, as Lee said, you know, all our teeth won't be white tomorrow morning. We're not all going to be 6 feet tall, and you know, so it's actually being realistic to participants, but setting out that this is a direction of travel. It's a longitudinal direction of travel. I think will help people feel comfortable that we're not trying to boil the ocean, but we're trying to engage with them to bring about change. And I think also, finally, without being too prescriptive, just almost being strategic about, you know, and this may speak against what we're doing, but all, you know, looking at those areas in the country and also maybe those key issues which we think can move the dial, because at the end of the day, there's an issue about you know, our system of democracy and you know, is very much geared on, you know, on a local level. You know, you can't buck the system. So how do we create a critical mass, maybe in a geographical area, you know, dare I say a constituency area, or on an issue area? We see, for example, the huge weight that's come behind the assisted dying bill, you know, and it was discussed 10 years ago. All of a sudden, there's a massive weight around it. Everyone's taking it up, quite naturally, and talking about it. So how can we find those key issues which people across politics agree on, whether that be a geographic or subject area, but not forgetting all our key areas of interest that we're working together now to gain critical mass.
Thank you very much. A lot of really interesting things coming here, but I think one of the key themes that I'm hearing is, you know, this massive chasm between government and people, and how do we bridge that? I mean, we're talking here about the power of the powerless, effectively. You know, how can we realize that we have the power at the grassroots level, work in our communities, as Brother Lee said earlier on, and then bring those communities together, you know, eventually to form a national assembly. And I think that speaks to you. MDB, can I invite you to share some thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. No, thank you for the invitation to take part in this group as well. I'm finding it fascinating. So I'm really boring, okay? Fairly interesting CV, but boring guy. I've worked across different areas of our ecosystem that surrounds us all every day. So media, government, academia, corporate, and NGOs. And I think if I had to choose one thing, and I think you asked us for one example, the most interesting connection I've made recently is with a group of young people in Brixton called YC UK. Some of you may have come across, Young Creators UK. It's a youth-led agency, youth-led project, empowering young people. And we were talking about connecting the unconnected, which I guess is where innovation comes from. This has been a theme of the discussion so far, I think. So I took them along to the House of Commons this week to the Youth Affairs APPG, and introduced them to that network. And I think by doing this and short-circuiting, I think by making people aware of the systems around them, these invisible corridors and invisible ceilings and so on, I think it empowers them. We don't need to patronize young people. They can work out things for themselves, but we can shine a torch in certain areas and say, this is going on, that's going on. How do you counter that? And I guess from my perspective, as what Mara might call the tribal elder, I'll pass on some knowledge to them and let them go for it. I'm not going to patronize them, tell them you have to do this, do that, but at least I can open doors for them, and then they can work out the rest for themselves on that granular level. And it should hopefully become less intimidating for them to go ahead and empower a new generation. And they're dealing with some very, very tough issues, and they're doing it with delight and joy, and they're opening doors. And I think it's a really good example. But that's just one example. I could go on and talk about others across Europe and in different places. But yeah, YC UK for me is top of mind at the moment, as an example of how grassroots activity can happen by empowering young people, by giving them a bricks and mortar space, and giving them sanction to progress.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay.
I was watching a video of Brother Lee sort of explaining this session earlier on, and he talked about radical democracy, radical spaces, radical anti-racism within the space. Quick question for Jeremy and Pete. How have you been feeling? You might have noticed that I've come to you last, as it were, on purpose. How have you been feeling?
Do you want to go first, Jeremy, or shall I go first? How do I feel in this space?
In this space, yeah.
I don't think it matters at all how I feel in this space. This is not my space. This is I'm learning, and I feel privileged to learn. Is that a good enough answer, Nick? Or
it is a good enough answer because it's an honest answer, but I would push back and say, no, your voice does matter, actually. Really.
So here we go. I don't want the white man dominating the space, Nick. It's
no, don't worry. We got this. We got this.
All right. Anyway, so I've got a bit of a question, but I don't want to take up too much space, and that is about I want to be on the Democratic Starship Enterprise, but the stuff that we've done in the past is like formal juries and assemblies. And Lee, I would love our assemblies to cost 100 grand, and they don't. So I'm not raking the cash in because of the juries and assemblies. But I want to ask you: do you think that the more formal assemblies and juries that we run, do you think that they could actually be causing damage? And I wonder if we can support each other in what we're trying to do. Do you know what I mean? Because what you're saying about shared empathy and empathy deficit and stuff and faith in humanity is what drives all the work that we do. Because I mean, geez, I'd be in such a dark place if I didn't have this stuff. Because when you bring people together, then people want to, surprise, they want to collaborate and they want to work together. They don't want to shit on each other and all that stuff. So these spaces are amazing and they're beautiful, and stuff that comes out of them can be really, really incredible. So I wonder, are there, but of course I share all the concerns that you have about people like me dominating these spaces, middle-class, straight, white blokes. But I wonder if we can still, you know, as we go on this journey of democratic renewal, is there a space for lots of different models?
Thank you. Oh, where did Lee go? Oh, there. Sorry, screen check. I think that was a question for you, Lee.
Yeah, I think there are space for those democratic models, and I think we're in the period where we want to innovate and look at that. But I want to be clear that the humanities perspective is the system is not fit for purpose. The
Yeah.
system has brought humanity to the brink of extinction through climate catastrophe and the degradation of democracy to the point where most people have lost absolute faith, and the far right are offering a whole new authoritarian strongman, post-colonial horror story as a means of taking it forward. But to come to your question specifically, I think there are lots of models out there, and partly what we want to do in the Humanity Project is innovate and see what's working. I think citizens juries are a great idea as long as they don't cost 100 grand. And they don't, clearly. And so you can have citizens juries and all sorts. I can see young people getting involved in citizens juries on the nature of the criminal justice system. How about that for a citizens jury? That would be something, wouldn't it? Children in care, having a citizens jury on the quality of care. So there's lots of things there and different models of assemblies and citizens juries that can form, if you like, a series of options for a local community that where we engage with, we can say, look, you can think about an assembly, you can think about a citizens jury, you can think about these other things, these other models. But what we're trying to do is to respond to the challenge from Deborah to say, we want to show you what power looks like, how much power you really have, that you're the most powerful people, in this whole political ecosystem. And when you come together, you can move mountains. And that's where we're going. But we're not naive enough to think that, a first past the post system and, voter ID and, voting between, in the way that we do currently, a sort of, what is it? I think it's a 17th. I don't think voting in Britain has changed very much since the 17th century, has it? It's virtually stayed roughly the same. And there's lots of room for innovation of that. Votes for 16-year-olds already happening in other parts of the country. There are regional variations in the type of democracy you get, which could be, part of a broader discussion around constitutional change. I think we've got to have constitutional change, and I think we've got to have a much more radical alternative that is much more human-centered and escapes the weight of dead men's ideas in the 20th century that so profoundly constrain us and limit our imagination about the possibilities in the world. But I love the idea of citizens juries, and I think it'd be great to do, a series of them, and we can talk further.
Thank you very much, Brother Lee. Mara, I'm going to come to you and then go to Claire next.
Are you sure I don't want to jump the queue?
No, I'm doing this on purpose.
Okay. I guess very briefly, because we've just had Pete and Lee, I will say that one of the things that I'm really curious about is how we can get people who the model of a citizens jury would appeal to, because it's supposed to be, I'm going to say it is in some ways fancy and academic and rigorous, to run them so that their communities, or employees more likely, get a taste of a democracy that they can then advocate for in the streets. That was number one. And then number two, I just had a question, because we've talked a lot about young people in this call, and I'm 34, so I don't think I'm really counted as young. But I'm also thinking a lot about the fact that it's actually people my age and up who are still making a lot of decisions and still going to the ballot box and right to the end. People have that opportunity, and that's actually where I think that there's a lot of activation that can be done, and people might be also easier to access and that kind of thing. So I just want to say, in a way that I don't hope doesn't sound weird, but like, let's not forget the grown folks who still got a lot of changing things to do.
Absolutely, thank you. Claire, how did you feel about me going to Mara before you, even though you had your hand up first?
Yeah, I felt all right about that, Nick. Don't worry.
All right.
It's kind of the point of inviting all these people here to listen to them. I wanted to just contribute something, because I know that we're going to talk in a minute about sort of thinking about some of the themes we've heard and stuff. But there have been conversations with somebody that some of you will know, Graham Smith, and other people that we know from the sort of deliberative democracy expert field, just trying to think through some different ways that you might improve the experience in a process for people who are more normally expecting to feel marginalised in a space and then may feel very marginalised still in a space, even though it's designed for quite equitable participation. And I wondered if I could just see if anyone has an immediate response to one of the suggestions we thought about, which was rather than having a demographic representative kind of sample, which you then overweight in favour of the people who are normally excluded or normally don't have a voice or whatever, to instead host a specific focused assembly space only with people from that group, from that community, so that they could then come with a formal presentation into the space, so that you can keep the sortition process sort of clean, if you like, for the purposes of, let's say, like a very big institutional citizens assembly, but you would have an expert input, which really represents lived experience as a form of expertise in a way which would bolster the ability of those people in the space to then say, there's been a special concentration on, let's say, the Black experience or cost of living issues. And that brought forward these things, which then makes that person as a participant in the space feel supported by a wider group of their community, so that there's been a wider consultation into that particular lived experience, particularly on the understanding that they're at a sharper end or they have a very particular experience of that. And you could say the same, I think, for disability, for women's, for trans. There's lots of different groups where you might think, actually, if you're proportionally represented in 100-person room, you're still a small number. And how can we design mechanisms basically to try and give them support in the processes, and to understand probably like what needs to be done with more acute focus on what these issues are doing to those communities, you know, who have a sort of intersection of different issues that make their experience unique. And so I don't know what other mechanisms there are. Maybe there are other ones that you could consider to try and sort of enhance the representation of the lives of certain people, basically.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And just on that point, want to echo something Lee was saying earlier on, that, you know, there are other models, you know, and we should not just look at one model to bring all the answers that we seek. You know, there are many alternatives, as it were. So, you know, we should get from all of them, you know, particular focus groups. Absolutely. Jeremy, you've been patient. How are you?
No, I'm listening. I'd quite like to go back to Mara's point, which I think is so important, which is when she said people don't know how to take power. That seems to me a kind of fundamental blockage in a way, because it's a systemic blockage as to in our breakout session, Mara said, well, I'm not sure I agree with the whole idea of democracy. And maybe that's why, because if democracy is about a form of kind of participation, mass participation, but if people don't know how to take that power, then it's not a form of real participation. So I think that for me, that's a really profound thing about how one unblocks. And it's not just about technocratic things of giving people toolkits or whatever. It seems to me a systemic thing of how we go beyond the current systems of power and talk about it in a different way. So I was very struck by that, and I think it's a really important point.
Excellent. Thank you very much. A quick reflection for myself. Oh, Deborah, did you put a hand up and then put it back down? Okay, quick reflection for myself. A lot of the time when I've been in Brother Lee, 2 seconds. When I've been in white spaces, or when I've spoken, I do a lot of research, academic research into inclusion and diversity, etc. When I've done research and spoken to people, the feeling I often get from racialized people is, you know, white spaces are toxic places, you know, and what comes across in a lot of those are, you know, there are a lot of little microaggressions or things people say, or try to fake and so on and so forth. That just makes them feel uncomfortable. So Claire, to your point about getting, as it were, I don't want to call it focus groups because that's a bit too whatever, but to get, you know, groups of people who are totally comfortable with each other, I think that's very good. But again, as one of many, many different ways. Brother Lee. You're on mute.
Just responding to this theme about empowerment. I don't know if people saw the New Zealand Maori sister who did the haka in the government. I mean,
yeah,
people all over the world were inspired, empowered, and cried. I'm sure, and that's what, yeah, lots of other communities were. And I want to speak to the power of culture, cultural empowerment, because that's why I'm powerful. Because I stand on 10,000 years of African culture. Of whom should I be afraid? Is my basic motto. So if you're culturally empowered, a culture can bring a sense of empowerment where democracy wanes. And I think that's why with the Humanity Project, what we focused on is almost like to put formal politics behind the culture and put culture first. And culture, I mean popular culture, culture that, you know, is accessible to the very people that we're trying to mobilize. And we've got all sorts of mechanisms, and Claire can talk about it more than I can. We've got all sorts of strategies for using that culture as a means of citizens' empowerment. When we did the Fate of Britain in Manchester, a 2-day cultural festival about democracy, some of the most powerful elements of it were singing and dancing together. You know, because when you do that, you feel that power, you feel that energy. And we had a massive sound system, LOWD, Love Over World Destruction sound system, which we founded. And we use that sound system to empower, you know, a couple of thousand people who came to that dance free of charge. We brought free joy to the masses to enjoy themselves. And through the process of enjoying themselves, through cultural participation, they begin to feel the power that collectivism can bring. And so I want to say that the antidote to that disempowerment feeling is indeed culture. And we can use culture in a very constructive and positive way.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And thank you all so much. Oh, Mara, very quickly.
Sorry, I feel like I've spoken a lot, but last year I wanted to say that I feel welcomed when I come into a space when there is music of any variety, really. But like Bella Cootie obviously went a long way, and food, like plenty of food from the jump. And especially in these times where we are being encouraged to think that everything is lacking because of the way society is. Yeah, food, music, and things like lighting and different seating. And, you know, like bean bags and stuff. And there are a few organizations I know that do this really, really well that I'd be very happy to like link up with anyone. But yeah.
That's exactly what Brother Lee's talking about, culture, actually. Okay, very last one to Lee, and then I pass to you, Claire. Sorry.
Rita.
We're running late. Sorry. Rita, sorry. You're on mute. You okay? You sure? All right. Okay, so we've had some really good stories, and I said to Claire, Alex, and David earlier on, we're just going to start warming up, and then we'll have to start thinking about going. It always happens. When we get together, you know, we take time to warm up, and then the stories really come flowing, right? Anyway, thanks for all your stories. As we move to the last portion, I want to pull together some of the themes that have come through, and if I can pass on to Claire. Claire, what have you heard? What has sort of piqued your interest, as it were?
Well, I think it's interesting what's come up with people. I've been making lots of sort of notes to try and think through what to bring up in this reflection. But I mean, one of the things that seems quite consistent is this sense of people needing to sort of at the same time have access to education and to be able to broaden their understanding of how things work in order to be able to feel like they can go in and sort of wrestle with the world out there, if you don't know what it's made up of, then you don't know how to go and change things about it. Perhaps also the you know, that completely relates, I guess, to this point about unblocking power and people's lack of belief in their own power, and where can we find that from? And I think that's been one of the things that Humanity Project has been thinking about for a long time. We've been saying, well, quite concerning that there's such a sort of limited level of political education throughout a lot of parts of this country. If you're going to then say, let's do a project where we start like getting everyone to do self-rule, then maybe there's a problem with that, where we're starting from this point now, a very impoverished sort of society-wide understanding. Or certainly like my frustration that people who know me well have probably heard me say before is how people who go to posh schools learn how to talk and they learn how to have all the skills for public life, and people who don't go to posh school don't learn that. So I, you know, found out what PPE at Oxford meant, i.e. the place where you make a prime minister, in my 30s, and I lost my shit about it, because I was like, I don't know how the world works, because I just went to normal school. So that's one thing. And also this kind of direction of travel thing. I mean, Floyd, you talked about this. It needs to be multi-issue, and people need to be able to feel like they're engaging in something that's taking on more than one thing at a time. And I think, you know, the fact that it's a journey, or the fact that it's a process, or that we're not going to do it all overnight, is also speaks back to this culture thing. If you take culture in its sort of like broadest sense, I'm excited by the idea that there's citizens' juries that people could run themselves, which is one of the things that was mentioned. So I have also been given the impression that these things are quite complicated and difficult things to do, and that we were trying to bootstrap it, and we'd have to find a special way to do that. And maybe we need more of the resources that other people have got access to think about smaller processes, more manageable processes, more jury orientated processes. That's really exciting. And I suppose the beginning point about visible leadership and proximity and stuff all feels like it's about being seen. A lot of people talked about the invisibility of systems, the invisible corridors, the hidden conversations, the hidden power, and how this, what we're trying to do, needs to be visible, and people need to be visible, and how we work needs to be seen and heard. And even to the column inches point that was made quite early on, which, you know, I know about getting column inches, and it's not always a very fun, it's not always a very fun thing to do. A lot of people on this call also know that very well. But it's true, you have to be able to be seen, and to be able to make what you're doing look and feel like it's definitely happening, and it's definitely got power potential. So yeah, all of those things I think super instructive. I probably missed lots of stuff there because I've got more notes than that, but maybe I'll give it back to you, Nick.
Thanks a lot. And I think you just struck it there, exactly why we need to do what Brother Lee was talking about, you know, have radical anti-racist spaces, you know, when we do these assemblies, because Black and brown people have been navigating this invisibility, this weathering effect for so long, you know. Anyway, so let's open it up for some final reflections. Maybe start with you, Brother Lee. Reflections on what we've heard.
Yeah, I think that I want people to continue thinking beyond today about how we can innovate the democratic engagement beyond the citizens popular assembly model, the citizens jury model, and any other models we can get, because we really want to try and test these different modes in various parts of the country. We're going around the country engaging with 10 cities this year, but to really support them in starting conversations. And we've chosen cities that we know we can bring together on similar issues that are, you know, culturally and geographically different, to forge these impossible conversations around increasing empathy and understanding. So today's been really insightful. I hope we've sparked something in your brain that will, you know, go away and look. We talked about earlier, didn't we, the hacker in New Zealand and the power of that. But, you know, there's another concept called the Maori table, where you sit around a top table and everybody's having a discussion, and somebody taps you on the shoulder from the audience, and you're instantly replaced by that person who then continues the discussion, and you sit in the audience, and so it goes on. So there are all these wonderful forms, and you know, you as experts in indigenous democracy, you know, I always see the tree as a fundamental symbol of democracy, because people meet under trees, whether it's in Africa or even here in the United Kingdom. You know, when it's raining, people meet under trees. Village discussions take place under trees. You know, the baobab tree, or you know, whichever tree it is, the oak tree. But trees are a fundamental symbol. So thinking about how we can get this feeling of empowerment to people using various different types of engagement that reflect the theme of democratic participation and empowerment. And really what I want you to inhale the fumes of after this meeting and think about and come back to us with some further ideas and explorations. But I really enjoyed it, and I thank you so much for sparing the time to come along to this discussion. It's been, I always enjoy talking to my people anyway. So
amazing, thank you very much. Just want to pick up on something very quickly. You started off by saying we need to innovate, but then you also expanded to say, look, there are all these other forms that we can take from. And Rita put a comment in there saying, look, we need to move quickly because, you know, things are that bad. So to that, I'll say we don't necessarily need to build a wheel again. You know, there are so many different ways that we can choose from, we can look at, we can engage with, you know, educate ourselves about, and then bring it to the locality, meet people where they are. Anyone final thoughts? Anyone else?
Thank you. I'm really grateful for the space and really grateful. The stuff I've been thinking about this has been really great. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. And I would just echo once again what Brother Lee said on his closing, that don't let this be the end. Let's, you know, if you have any further thoughts, please contact the team. You know, all thoughts really welcome. And oftentimes when you finish such a meeting, you have these thoughts and you reflect a bit more, and that's when the real rich stuff comes in. So please keep in touch. Let's not let this not be the, you know, a one-shot affair. Anyone else?
I just wanted to say thank you for the invitation and for creating the space to have this discussion.
Thank you, thank you. Anyone else before I pass on to David? Gospel, we lost you for a second there. For a bit. Are you with us? Ah, okay, I see in the chat. Right, okay, with that, I shall pass to David.
Thank you, Nick, for expertly handling all of that. I'm going to try to see if I can speak with the music underneath and see if that's going to work for us. We'll see. So in terms of what happens next, Alex has been diligently listening and will be doing a sort of quick readout based on the themes and a few other things which he will share probably tomorrow or early next week. This is part of a wider series of events trying to get into, we'll see if the music's going to come in, getting in under the skin of assemblies and how they can be so much better than they are right now. So there will be a summary or a drawing together of all of the different threads from all of the different things on, I've forgotten the date off the top of my head, Claire or Alex, if you could stick that in the chat. So that'll be happening.
Sorry, 10th of December.
10th of December. So we'll be extending an invitation to you then. You'll be able to hear what else has happened in many of the other roundtables. And of course, I think what we've heard from this, I mean, in the chat, Alex and I have been bouncing between each other on just how we've heard these different sort of lines of inquiry about how to make these kinds of processes more anti-racist from everybody, and that the next year in the build-up to the Fate of Britain is a chance to experiment on those lines of inquiry and come up with ever better practices. So it's a chance for us to engage with all of that, and it's fantastic to hear all the things you're already doing and all of the enthusiasm. With that, Claire, any final thoughts?
No, not much to add. Just that I'm very grateful to everyone, and I'm also really pleased that we've managed to sort of put together this little series and complete it before Christmas. So when we do the roundup on the 10th, it's going to be thinking through some of the creative stuff, because what I didn't say at the beginning, which I should have done, is some of the purpose of doing these conversations was to bridge the gap between people who are working on the ground with less knowledge, less experience, less resource, and the people who are working in a more expert field or academic space. In addition to that, what we tried to do is include people from our sort of arts and culture networks who can then make creative responses to the conversations that have happened. So whether that's something in writing, whether that's something in an illustration, we had somebody write a poem. And so we're trying also to explore what kind of creative supporting work can be done at the same time as these inquiries, or just any kind of dialogue process, so that we can think about how to creatively sort of supercharge the work that we do in dialogue and assembly work in the future. And so we're going to look on the 10th at some of the creative outputs that have come from the work that we've done in this series. And we've got one more conversation to do next week, and then we will have completed it. So thank you very much. And I'm really excited to see what we can put together from the series. And then on another note, I'm very excited about where this conversation can go, because we've obviously just started something and there's loads more to do.
Thank you, everyone. And we have finished just about in time with the whole crescendo of the Black classical music tour. That's fantastic. Thanks, everyone.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. We finished on time.
Thank you.
Great.
I appreciate you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
It
you.
was lovely being part of the session.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you again soon.
Bye.
David, I'm feeling this.